Welcome to the Real Bible Rob podcast. And this is a repeat of an earlier podcast that I had sound problems with. So I'm re-recording it. So if you saw the one before, you'll recognize this. This is about John 18:33 through 37, which is Jesus before Pilate. And it's one of the most interesting passages in all of the New Testament, I think, because the power dynamics of what are going on are just fascinating. Uh, when the election happened, right after that, I had I put out a video and I had to do a lot of pastoral care, which kind of makes sense because a lot of people are very upset. And I put out a video called Jesus Lost. And I talked about how Jesus went to the cross willingly, and some people, most people, I would say, were very comforted by the video. In fact, I got 400,000 views on it in just a couple of days. And most of the comments were really uh, helped by that. But there were some very angry people. There were people who say, no, Jesus didn't lose. Jesus won. Jesus, how can you say that Jesus lost? There was a lot of that kind of uh, comments. So it got me to thinking. Now, I wasn't really surprised necessarily that there would be some opposition to this because this is such a big part of American Christianity. Is we always have to have a happy ending. We always have to have some kind of retribution in the end. We're not satisfied with just the humility of Jesus alone. We want to be associated with winners and not losers. So this passage, Jesus before Pilate, tells us an awful lot about this, about Jesus crucified. Now, if you're not familiar with it or you don't remember it exactly, this is where Pilate, when he's before Jesus, before Pilate, Pilate says, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And then Jesus says, "Well, my kingdom is not of this world. Why do you say that?" And then Pilate says, Jesus, your own people are sending you to me to be crucified. Don't you have any way to defend yourself? And then Jesus basically says, uh, you say so. If these people were uh, my people and my kingdom was of this world, they would fight for me, but they're not. And then Pilate says, are you a king? And Jesus once again repeats that no, he's not of this world, and uh, that people who testify to the truth know who I am. So here we are with a power dynamic that's very, very strong. We have Jesus giving Pilate permission to crucify him. There's a number of things here where Pilate, you remember, sent Jesus off to go to Herod because Jesus was a Galilean and he had to go to Herod in order to get permission to execute a Galilean. And by Herod putting a crown of thorns on him and sticking him in a robe and mocking him and slapping him, basically is telling Pilate, you can do whatever you want with this guy. And then Pilate also goes to the leaders and say, well, wait a minute, you have an opportunity. It's Passover. We can give clemency to another guy, this Barabbas guy, or Jesus. In other words, he's giving the temple hierarchy, the Jewish leadership, another opportunity to defend Jesus. And then he asks Jesus himself to defend himself. Now, our response to this, we can have many responses, but most people respond to this going, Jesus, fight back, fight back. Why are you being so passive? It's a very natural reaction to this. But you can see that Jesus is handing power over to Pilate to let himself be crucified. Now, a lot of people will say, well, that's because, Jesus is Messiah and he's the Son of God and it was all foreordained in the beginning. But you remember, Jesus was a real human. He didn't know everything. And that's a big part of our theology as Christians, Trinitarian Christians, is that this idea that Jesus was fully human and not didn't have a lot, probably didn't have complete knowledge. He knew he was special. He knew he was the Son of God. He said so. But for him to be able to hand over is an extraordinary thing for him to be able to do that. So that's why I said, remember, it's in Jesus losing, Jesus handing over control, handing power away from himself. And that even with all the opportunities that Pilate gives him to seize it. Now remember, like most of us, most most normal people in that situation would have said something like, "Oh, of course, Pilate, you should be afraid because these people are going to fight for me. My temple hierarchy, they may be, upset with me, but you better watch out. You better not, if you execute me, there's going to be an insurrection." Most people would have done that as a negotiating tactic, but as you can see, Jesus didn't do that. And so that's what makes this such an extraordinary story. Now, of course, Jesus in through the cross into resurrection and through nonviolence does win eventually, and then wins the case eventually. But it's in the losing, it's in being in front of the cross that matters. It's interesting that just after the election, I was at a monastery for a retreat. And it was a Catholic monastery, and I could see crucifixes everywhere. Now, of course, being Presbyterian, our crosses are empty; they're just crosses. But of course, in the Catholic context, you see Jesus hanging on the cross. And that's a reminder that it's Christ crucified that is the Savior of the world, not necessarily Christ resurrected. Of course, resurrection is an outcome of this. It's natural that and that there is victory after, through death and through and later. And, of course, in their theology, they have the harrowing of hell and all of those things. But the idea is, it's the crucified Christ, the humble Christ, the one that goes to the cross and dies on the cross in pain, is the one that saves us. So this naturally leads to another verse and really affects us especially as American Christians, and that is this idea of Jesus being a lion. And people are very concerned about being with a losing or a weak Jesus, a humble Jesus. So they say things like, "Oh, well, but Jesus is also a lion," right? It says so in Revelation 5:5. Now, we have to be careful with this because a lot of us love Narnia books, love C.S. Lewis, and we see Jesus as a lion, the lion Aslan, who is a very kindly lion and everything, but he's still a lion, right? And he can still eat you. But that comes from this image in Revelation 5:5 of the Lion of Judah. The story there is that the uh, the John, who is the person having the vision, the revelation, is crying and he's worried. He goes, "Nobody can open the scrolls. Nobody's worthy to open the scrolls." And then the elder comes and says, "Ah, don't cry, don't weep. The Lion of Judah, who is the root of David, is worthy to open the scrolls, and he will do that." The thing is that now I said in a sermon the elder was wrong. It depends what you mean by wrong. At least incomplete. It's because it's not the root of David, the Lion of Judah, who opens the scroll and breaks the seals. It's actually the slain lamb. You just go one verse later, Revelation 5:6, and then the subsequent verses after that, where it's the slain lamb. Now, some people will say, "Oh, but see, Jesus is both the lion and the lamb." You can also interpret it as Jesus was from the tribe of Judah, the root of David, the Lion of Judah, and then transformed into the slain lamb. In other words, violence, an image of violence, which the Lion of Judah is, because Judah was the only tribe to survive all of the invasions. And also Judah was the one that consolidated in the Second Temple period and afterwards the power of the Israelites into Jerusalem to become the Jews. And this power, it was achieved through violence, honestly. So you could say, oh, but maybe that was worthy according to the elder, but it was actually the slain lamb through humility, through sacrifice, that the scroll was opened and the seals were broken. So this is really important because a lot of evangelical pastors, especially ones that are reformed, like Mark Driscoll, for example, will say, well, Jesus was humble in life and then resurrected in power and glory, and then will come back as this retributive warrior that's going to kill your enemies. Get on his side. But the thing is that if you look at Revelation closely, you can see that's not the imagery. Yes, it is true that in chapter 20, 21, you'll see Jesus on a white horse and a tongue as a sword and things like this. But you have to remember that that's the very end. That's after everything. That's after the fall of the Great Babylon. And but to say that Jesus is our warrior really has a lot more to do with us and a lot more to do with our American ideal of having a retributive ending. You see that all the time in literature, you see it in movies and everything, is there's almost always a violent ending. and the Jesus story is one of those. But I think that it's important to get away from that. It's better to be more like what I saw at the monastery, the crucifix, coming before Christ crucified. If you notice, Paul often says this too. Paul talks about, I preach Christ crucified. Very important. He doesn't say, I preach Christ resurrected. He doesn't say, I preach Christ powerful, who's going to fight for you. The whole story of the gospel is that redemption, salvation comes through humility, sacrifice at the cross, nonviolence. And that's where we get this image of Jesus being nonviolent. So I appreciate your taking the time today to listen to me and subscribe, like, comment. I'd love to see that. I'm just kind of getting kicked off and I'm learning how to use the system. That's why I needed to re-record this so that it wouldn't be so annoying to listen to. So with this, as I always say, people say lots of things about the Bible that aren't really there, and I wish you blessings.